So hopefully this is going to do what it's supposed to do and rotate quietly in the background, but we'll see. I don't know who's controlling it, so if it doesn't start rotating, someone may need to do something. So I know I'm between you and the end of the evening, and we've had some very good panels, and also feel, obviously, my remarks were prepared before hearing and learning everything I've learned today, so I hope you make some allowance for that in some of what I say. But I am very pleased to be with you this evening to remember and honor our friend and colleague, Karen Hunter. It's really a challenge to speak about Karen with this audience, where many of you knew her personally, and those who did not certainly knew her by reputation. She was widely recognized for her strategic vision of scholarly publishing during the transition from print to electronic and well beyond that. She recognized and helped others understand the value of digital tools for researcher access and improved productivity that resulted. After early career positions at the Cornell University Library and Baker and Taylor, Karen joined Elsevier in 1976. She established her reputation in the industry and the library community after she joined Elsevier, and it's through her time with Elsevier that most of us came to know her. I confess that I've been unable to identify my initial meeting with Karen, but I know that our paths crossed many times. Occasionally we worked together, excuse me, on issues of common interest, and occasionally our contact was more casual or social. I heard her speak at a variety of library and industry meetings through the years, and I always found her to be thoughtful, challenging, and forward-thinking without being confrontational or abrasive. A difficult task at any time, but particularly during the tumultuous changes that technology, especially the internet, brought to publishing and to libraries and to society as a whole. Karen served a unique role at Elsevier and in the information industry at the time. This is how she described her role in an interview that was given just as she retired. I felt I was being paid to speak up, to say things that ought to be said, or things others couldn't. To have that level of freedom, trust, and ability to make a change, to make a difference, was really extraordinary. Her time at Elsevier ended formally with her retirement as Senior Vice President of Global Academic Relations in 2010, although she continued to consult with Elsevier for several more years. Those of us of a certain age participated in those tumultuous changes with Karen, but all of us continue to adapt and to help our organizations improve services for our users based on the new opportunities that continue to arise. It's an endless challenge to prepare for the future in an environment that continues to evolve rapidly. Even as we meet our current challenges, we must prepare for the future challenges we think we can foresee and those we can't, and to create sustainable organizations as Judy recommended for us this morning. In preparing for this talk, I spoke with a number of people who knew and worked with Karen, and I read a number of tributes to her. There were many words and phrases that came up over and over again, and I began to list them. I had a boss many years ago who used to say, "To list is to limit," and that's certainly true with respect to Karen's attributes. It became a very long list. I chose to create the word art that I'll be showing you this evening to share some of those terms with you. I couldn't use all of the words, even those that were often repeated, so you may be surprised at some that are missing, as well as recognizing many of the words that are there. If you look carefully, you'll see the words wit and humor, characteristics that may be ones you yourself would ascribe to Karen. I like to think that she would be amused by my word art, not just its imperfections and limitations, but in particular by the fact that I'm presenting it to you using PowerPoint. In 2001, Karen delivered the prestigious Miles Conrad Memorial Lecture at NFACE Annual Conference, and she began with a single PowerPoint slide saying, "Friends don't let friends PowerPoint." And here I am using PowerPoint to honor her, but as you will see, I have very few slides, which will rotate in the background while I speak. So I'm not really speaking from PowerPoint slides. I suppose I'm getting away with it that way. It's surprisingly hard to find usable pictures of Karen, but I've included a few recent ones, including the portrait from her retirement. I also included selected comments that acknowledge her contributions and her attributes. I've simplified and consolidated those comments, so they're not true quotations and therefore not attributed to specific individuals, but you may recognize some of your own words of tribute on these slides. Karen was a very well-educated woman with 3 master's degrees, one in history from Cornell, one in library science from Syracuse, and another in business from Columbia. While her education certainly contributed to her credibility, it was her personality, her intelligence, and her ability to see both sides, or really all sides, and find common ground, and above all, her willingness to challenge herself and others that made her such an important contributor in the development of digital access to scholarly publishing. Mark Seeley, her colleague from Elsevier, wrote a memorial article in Library Connect honoring Karen Hunter, a pioneer of digital publishing and library services, in which he summarized Karen's contributions this way. Relations between academic publishers and research libraries have often gone through difficult times, and uniquely among publishing executives, Karen was able to genuinely communicate, negotiate, circumventing predetermined positions. He concluded saying, in the final chapter of her career, Karen's role was in library relations, but always with a strategic dimension. Regardless of her title at any given point, many senior executives would routinely ask her for advice or ask others if they had sought her input. Her influence, while informal at times, was palpable and critical. Karen led many pioneering initiatives within Elsevier and the industry, starting with scanned journal content on CD-ROMs for the Adonis project in the 80s, 2 print-to-electronic journal projects, Tulip and Peak, and eventually the development of Elsevier's flagship online product, Science Direct. She co-directed industry participation in digital preservation initiatives such as Portico and JSTOR, and was instrumental in the development of other important multi-publisher initiatives, and often remained active in them as they matured. At the time she retired, she was on the boards of Crossref, Clocks, the Copyright Clearance Center, and ORCID, for example. But her contributions were not just important to Elsevier and other publishers. Karen was respected and admired by the library community as well. In 2006, Karen was the first publisher to receive the prestigious CSA Ulrich Serials Librarianship Award from the ALA, Association for Library Collections and Technical Services, affectionately known as ALEX. She was acknowledged, I quote, for her leadership in the collaborative development of the electronic delivery of scholarly information. The awards committee described Karen as an innovator and thought leader. They praised her commitment beyond any interest she may have as an employee of a single publishing company. And they acknowledged her for spearheading research initiatives that influenced the thinking of an entire professional community. Another colleague, Chrisanne Lowe, described Karen this way. Karen had a gift that's sorely missing these days. She had the gift of listening and bringing people together, moving what at first appeared to be deeply trenched thinking into positions that could become together. Her strategic thinking always guided us toward the objective and the outcome, and she would persuasively go to task with those who put up barriers, be it an external customer or any CEO of Elsevier. She dealt with them equally. Karen combined her background in library science and her astute business acumen to bridge a divide. Karen was the person who brought all of the perspectives together. She pushed both Elsevier and its customers out of our comfort zones so that we could create something new together. She built trust and she demanded respect for all parties, understanding the value of all players in the mix. Reviewing even this brief summary of the many projects Karen led and participated in leads me to speculate about what she would be doing with and for us if she was still here. One example that comes to mind immediately is the development of Korus. It began just after Karen retired, or I'm sure she would have been actively involved. It's right up her alley. Many of you are members of Korus, so I'm sure you understand a great deal about it, so I'm not going to try to describe it here beyond saying that the initial participating publishers first engaged with funding agencies to identify their needs, and then later brought academic research libraries to the table to help the service address the needs of our institutions while simultaneously attracting additional publishers. And I'm proud that I'm among the first academic research library deans to participate in the development of Korus. What Korus exemplifies what can be accomplished with collaboration among publishers and libraries and funders, very much the topic of this meeting today. At the University of Florida, we're developing internal workflows to use the data compiled by Korus that identifies articles by UF authors reporting on research funded by US government grants. We will share that information with the authors, the Associate Deans for Research in each author's college, and the Office of Compliance under the Vice President of Research. Korus not only identifies the articles by UF authors, it verifies whether the author manuscript appears on an agency's portal, thus indicating whether the author has fulfilled the obligation to deposit the manuscript in the appropriate funding agency repository. This reporting confirms when compliance has taken place, and perhaps even more importantly, provides notice in time to correct the omission when it has not. Major publishers, many of whom are in this room, are actively contributing content to Korus: AAAS, ACM, ACS, Elsevier, IEEE, the New England Journal of Medicine, Springer Nature, Taylor Francis, Wiley, number of the society publishers, Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, Rockefeller University Press, American Mathematical Society, to name but a few. There's a large number who have become active. Korus is reporting that 90% of its members are now identifying funders as part of their workflow, and as more publishers participate, this service becomes more comprehensive and more valuable to the funding agencies and to the authors and their institutions. So I would say to you, if your company is not already a member of Korus, or it's a member but is not yet identifying funders for this important initiative, I encourage you to imagine Karen challenging you and cajoling you to become an active participant. Among the memorial tributes following Karen's death, Anne Gabriel made one that seemed particularly suited for concluding these remarks. WWKD, what would Karen do, is always with me. Her legacy is a high bar. Those were Anne's words. In the United States, we're watching with interest the developments here in Europe, such as Plan S and OA 2020, and hoping that publishers and those who license their data will find new business models that are acceptable to both, and that eventually cross over the Atlantic to us as well. If Karen were here with us, she would be active in these discussions, at least behind the scenes, and hopefully fulfilling her role as a person who can understand multiple points of view and create a bridge over these very troubled waters. In her Miles Conrad Memorial Lecture in 2001, Karen reflected on remarks that she made in 1986 at a Society for Scholarly Publishing meeting. She quoted herself as saying, "As to the issue of library-publisher relations, my concern is the general deterioration of relations over the past 10 to 15 years. Once the library budget difficulties of the early 1970s were juxtaposed with the continued expansion of publishing output during the same period, frustration began." She then added, "Think about some of what I said. First, relations with libraries had been deteriorating already then for more than a decade. Now, in 2001, it's 15 years later. While some librarians are not hostile, others have built their careers on hating all publishers to some degree, but consigning commercial publishers to our special circle of hell." She critiqued her own 1986 statement that the main concern is not about the overall level of funding, saying, "What rubbish. Of course the concern should have been about the level of library funding. We know that for decades the growth in the scientific literature has absolutely paralleled the growth in the number of R&D researchers, and we know that most libraries have not kept pace with their funding." So now, 17 additional years later, that's even more true, and it continues to be a source of friction between librarians and publishers. While librarians acknowledge that publishers are delivering more high-value content each year and that our researchers need access to that content, we continue to call attention to an unsustainable business model where the annual price increases exceed the growth in our budgets every year. And it's not just the librarians who recognize this as an unsustainable business model. Our provosts, vice presidents of research, chief financial officers, senior research faculty, and others on our campus are well aware of this problem. What's surprising is that we've been able to meet the financial demands for as long as we have, but it has been at considerable cost to our collections and to many of our other responsibilities, and it is unsustainable. Several years ago, I told my provost he should accept these increases like utility rate increases. He normally has a great sense of humor, but his answer was completely without humor. He said that he only wished my e-journal price increases were as modest and as infrequent as his utility rate increases. For libraries and our parent institutions, it's no longer a question of value, it's a question of affordability. Many of you are involved in these discussions about new pricing and access models within your own organizations. This is the next major challenge for publishers and their customers, and it's a challenge that Karen would have welcomed, and to which she would have brought her usual insights and ability to seek meaningful compromise. But the perception is that publishers may have waited nearly too long to acknowledge this situation and take action to address it. Librarians seeking an alternative to what they perceived as fruitless and unequal negotiations with publishers have found new allies in the organizations that fund the research, and that has shifted the balance of power. Ricky Poindar, writing about Plan S in his blog in mid-October, quoted our speaker earlier today, Robert Jan, saying to Nature, Plan S, the S in Plan S can stand for science, speed, solution, shock. Poindar then says shock would certainly seem to be an appropriate word, and shock was surely what publishers felt when Plan S was announced. After all, they have successfully managed to delay and subvert open access for some 25 years now. They perhaps assumed they could continue doing so. But if successful, Plan S could bring this dilly-dallying to a dramatic end. So I hasten to say this is his opinion, not mine, but a very interesting and challenging thought, right? He also quoted Smits as saying, we expect publishers to come forward with offerings which comply with the principles outlined in Plan S, and it's for publishers to provide Plan S compliant routes to publication in their journals so researchers can choose where to publish when accepting funding from those who sign Plan S. This morning, Judy said that shock may have had its place as a wake-up call to getting the attention of the publishers. But I would add that it has no place when seeking to influence stakeholders and drive change. Whatever the past faults of publishers that may have provoked this demand for immediate and dramatic change, this is not the way to continue negotiations and establish new business models. That said, publishers cannot afford to respond by taking umbrage or waiting until a much higher percentage of funding agencies, including those outside of Europe, agree to Plan S or something comparable to it before they act. We have too many examples in the United States right now about what happens when each side refuses to compromise or have meaningful dialogue with the opposing side. If Karen were here, I'm certain she would join me in saying that this is the time for publishers to accept responsibility for their past failures, always a good first step when you're trying to engage with the opposition, and to propose bold new business models that, while they may not be fully compliant with Plan S principles, offer dramatic changes and show significant willingness to make substantial movement toward open access. Librarians and funders, in turn, need to acknowledge and praise positive changes that publishers like Springer Nature, and as we heard this morning, Wiley, have already made, another good first step when trying to engage the opposition. To keep things moving forward, both sides, really all three sides, need to be less rigid. Seeking meaningful compromise should not be viewed as making concessions without receiving anything in exchange. Should be viewed as an essential step toward bringing everyone to the table so real progress can be made. And right now it seems we're hearing more about shock than about successful collaborations and positive change. Although I will say I wrote that statement before listening to the wonderful dialogue today. So I'm really delighted at much of what I heard today. And I do think the Wiley announcement is certainly very hopeful in that regard as a model. I don't have the answers, and I know the issues are complex and that it's difficult to make dramatic changes so quickly, but I also know that the publishers have many talented people who can find the answers and who can help their organizations through what's certainly going to be seismic changes. This is your chance to step forward and provide leadership, to embrace open access, to use your infrastructure, your resources, and your skills to be champions, not the opposition. Rapidly develop and offer new and innovative services that your customers will be willing to pay for without holding journal content hostage. I know some of you already understood the tsunami was approaching and you've been preparing for it. Unfortunately, the ground has shifted and the timetable is now being set by others, so you need to accelerate your development. Others who are less well prepared will face an even greater challenge because they have to catch up before they can move ahead. If you're leading these discussions, you need to empower your team and challenge them to come up with innovative options. If you're not leading the discussions and examination of options within your own organization, you have the opportunity to look at this through Karen's eyes and follow Karen's example. You can listen and strive to understand all points of view, even when the opposition seems irritating or unreasonable. You can seek to identify compromises that can give something to all sides, hopefully enough to create new business models that most can live with. You can speak truth to power. One of the statements that was often made about Karen was that she could speak truth to power within your own organization and challenge entrenched positions and the fear that keep rapid progress from occurring. You can try to be the bridge, or at least a few sturdy planks on the bridge over these troubled waters. Whether you're with a publisher or an association representing publishers, a library or a funding agency, I urge you to start by asking yourself the question that Anne Gabriel posed. WWKD, what would Karen do? But proceed by asking yourself quickly, WCID, what can I do? I can think of no better way to honor Karen's memory. Thank you.